Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Voxology Podcast. Michael, Carl, Erie, Timothy John Stafford, and the Lord Jesus Christ joining you today on the show. And we know Jesus is with us for a couple of reasons. Number one, we're going to be quoting from him. But number two, there are two of us gathered, even via Zoom. So
right. There you go.
I mean, he said he would. So we're hoping
I'm sure
he
he
speaks
had
a little bit
digital
today.
technology in mind when he said that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Timothy, how are you? I know our mutual friend doesn't like the banter, but I say heck with him.
That's right.
I say heck with him. How you went whitewater rafting yesterday?
I did.
You can't swim well.
I cannot.
Which is a good combo.
Yes. Or no.
What's the class like? The class of rapids that you're dealing with?
Yesterday was not crazy. Yesterday was like a 3+ and a lot of 2s. So one of my good buddies, my next door neighbor, is learning how to guide. So so we did that stretch so that he could really kind of like be comfortable and do whatever. So yeah, it's fun. It's a lot of fun.
That's great.
Yeah.
What is one thing? This is a cheesy pastor question. What is one thing in your life that is bringing you joy right now?
Well, that kind of stuff is so good. It's like a therapy thing too, because when you're on the river, it forces you to shut your brain off. Like you have no option, because you're paying attention. You have to row with everybody else. When you get into the rapids, it's very fast, and you have to react really fast.
Yeah.
So in that way, it's a huge gift, because turning my brain off is the one thing the therapist hasn't been able to crack yet.
Yeah.
And that kind of stuff will do it.
Yeah.
So that brings me joy. Playing music does the same thing. It'll focus me. I guess so. That's the through line.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whatever can shut it down and focus.
Podcasting.
My mind never wanders here.
We had somebody write in. They said, I just stopped the podcast to write this quick note. Tim just said that would have taken us into the weeds a bit and we would have gotten yells. His response, the tangents that take us into the weeds are just as important as the main topic. Walking the long road every week with you guys.
Yeah, that's right.
Pearl Jam reference on top of affirmation for Tim Stafford.
What was it, my birthday?
Right? We got loads of emails, not loads, but I'm going to read several, and by several I mean 4.
I appreciate all the clarifications.
Reflecting a bit on two different subjects. One is the questionnaire about therapy. Got a couple replies to that, and then the whole power over thing. Thank you for to the Holy Post for having me on and talking about power over. And I know you know this, Tim, because we do lots of speaking, but there are moments when you are reflecting on a conversation about 5 minutes after it happened and realized I'm just so dumb.
It's like in high school when someone picks a fight with you and you're like, oh, I should have said this and this and this.
Yes. So Sky was talking about Jesus using power over to demons and saying, well, hey, Jesus is human. Jesus uses power over. Therefore, it's okay for humans to use power over. And the dumbassery escaped me. But it was like, well, Jesus didn't ever use power over like that with other human beings. So great. Let's say, fantastic, guys. Let's use power over with the demonic. There's still no biblical or New Testament sanction for power over other human beings. So take that and put it in your pipe.
Mr.
We got loads of questions about that. I want to start though with the questionnaire that Tim.
Oh, the therapy, right?
The therapy questionnaire. So this is from somebody who is a pre-licensed marriage and family therapist practitioner.
Oh.
So I've learned the longer the title, the more important you are.
We should change our titles.
Yes, to co-host and co-ho-host.
Co-host.
Or co-co-coast. So he has, I mean, it's a long and beautiful, well-written email, but he brings up a couple of salient big word points.
Wow.
He talks about how, there are different approaches, of course, to the fields of Christianity and psychology and how they relate. Approaches will differ based on their presuppositions and methodologies, based on the wording and focus of the questions of the questionnaire we read last episode. I wonder if this is written from a biblical or Christian counseling approach where scripture has more authority or power than empirical data or licensure requirements. Those coming from that approach may not even get licensed by any board because they would be required to follow state laws and ethical codes. It is interesting to note that even some places like Focus on the Family, which clearly prefers a biblical counseling approach based on its website, has a full explanation as to why they only work with licensed professionals, interestingly enough. As Mike stated, some of those questions are well worth asking of any therapist, and while I would personally be able or willing to, in the right context, discuss even some of the theological questions with clients, some of them go too far in blurring the personal and the professional. What are you looking at right now, Tim? You're looking off.
Well,
Did I lose you?
No, I'm listening to you.
Are you focused?
I am. I'm trying
to
track with it.
Are you like whitewater rafting focused?
Yes.
Tim?
No, not quite there, but...
He continues, differing regulations, laws, or ethical codes dictate what can and cannot be shared about other clients without their consent. The importance of preventing dual relationships, even in some aspects of self-disclosure. He then goes on to talk about, kind of the need to know where people stand on specific issues. What do they think about LGBTQ plus topics? How will they respond when I, a client, talk about how to handle someone in my family coming out? Will there be validation, judgment? Will they discuss their own LGBTQ identity? How will that change our relationship? There is a tension or anxiety when it comes to not knowing how someone would respond to what we think, say, or believe. But isn't that anxiety something we need to lean into? Yes, we want to be safe in our squares, but our calling requires us to be in the world, interacting with real people as they are, regardless of how similar or dissimilar they are to us or our comfort areas. A therapist may have to provide similar quality of therapy to a MAGA Republican and to a progressive socialist, one right after the other. Hopefully. And then this is the part I thought was really good. And this is where I want to spend a little bit of time. The task of therapy depends on our presuppositions about what therapy is for. If it is to get to know or befriend a therapist, then the therapeutic relationship involving payment is not an appropriate place to start. We can think of therapy like the difference between a window and a mirror. We see others through a window because they are designed to be transparent. Personal relationships require transparency. A mirror, on the other hand, is designed to reflect back what is in front of it. If therapy is for a client to work through life challenges, then the therapist should be a mirror, opaque and able to shift and reflect different pictures, stories, or ideas back to the client. And this is where I was trying to head. So did you get what he was the metaphor there?
I think so.
So a therapist isn't there to be our friend.
Correct.
And so self-disclosure is a tool for the therapist. It's not the basis of friendship.
Right.
So the therapist should not be a window allowing you, the client, into their soul.
Right.
Rather, the therapist is to be a mirror, which is reflecting back to you what it is that you're saying, the patterns, the repetitions, the habits. A good therapist, and this is where I have an issue with Christian biblical counseling of the sort that was hinted at. A good therapist won't let you know where they stand on those sorts of issues because it doesn't matter.
Correct.
They're not there to fix you or change you. They're there to lead you through a process of your own self-discovery. The good ones, in my experience. So I wouldn't have the foggiest idea what my therapist thinks politically or about LGBT plus issues or whatever. And if I knew, then I would find a new therapist because that therapist, and then this is just me speaking, I'm not there to hear their thoughts on things. I'm there to help I'm there so that they will help me sift my thoughts
Yes.
on things and reflect back to me what they're hearing and seeing in an objective way with no emotional attachment. So I actually trust the
and then
feedback
hopefully give you
giving.
the tools to.
Yes. And then their expertise comes in giving you the tools to unwind all of the patterns and social dynamics that we find ourselves trapped in. So the biblical counseling approach says that the role of the therapist is to try to lead you into Christ likeness. And that's where I'm just kind of like, I'm not so sure, because then I would want to know what their view of Christ likeness is. Absolutely. But I love the other side of therapy where what I'm experiencing in the context of a well-defined therapeutic relationship is grace and non-judgment and non-condemnation. But I'm not learning about their take on things. I'm learning about my take on things and how whacked that sucker can be. Now, a counterpoint to my argument right here comes from another email that we got, who said, one of the outcomes of a recent event I attended is an increased openness towards finding a therapist. I plan to speak with a friend from church who works in the therapy world and ask them for their thoughts. As it happens, this ties in a bit with yesterday's Voxology podcast episode. Mike read through a sample questionnaire for vetting therapists and counselors, and I appreciated the discussion Tim and Mike had over these questions. Tim mentioned wanting, quote, a therapist who will dig into my dark corners and help me heal. And both of you communicated that these questions might get in the way of that. Now, I say this as someone who hasn't been to therapy, so take this all with many grains of salt. But as I've thought about what I'm looking for in a therapist, there are two things about which I want to be at least on a vaguely similar-ish page with my therapist. As a Christian, I want them to understand that my faith and my trauma is a huge part of my life. And as a queer man, I don't want them to see my sexuality as one of my dark corners from which they can help me heal. My faith and my sexuality are big parts of who I am, and I've had both pointed out to me as things to have removed or fixed. I'm wary of going to a therapist that I can't trust to accept both of these parts of myself, and so in that regard, I can see where someone who might try to use at least some of the questionnaire is coming from. So, counterpoint. And if I were, and again, I mean, I could be so wrong, and please, our community is so great about gently correcting, where they hear us in error.
You can be and are wrong.
But the kind of therapist I'm envisioning is not someone who would ever look at you and say, yes, you need healed from X, Y, and Z in your moral behavior inventory.
Right.
The kind of therapist I'm talking about is a therapist who is again, it's the whole self-discovery thing. Like we're sort of co-learners in my story. And I know that's your experience too. And so maybe I'm sure there are times we go to therapy to get something fixed, and that there are very prescriptive therapists that are out there. I'm hesitant towards going to those kinds of therapists unless there is a really direct, healthy line between, hey, I need direction here. Because then I'm like, well, there are pastors and spiritual rectors in the community of faith. But a therapist, man, I don't know. I think a good, healthy therapist would never let you know what they really think. In fact, my therapist last week apologized for giving me a straight answer.
Which is so great. That's such a that's a good therapist move. A bad therapist, I think, would gloss that over.
Right.
Like my therapist, as I brought up, like she will, if she gives me a piece to chew on and I'm like, I don't think so, here's why, I will watch her process that in real time, be like, okay, I see what you're saying, let's try it this way then.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, you're listening to me and you're invested in really tracking how I work. And I'm like, that's just so encouraging. It's like the symptoms and the causes thing that we have talked about ad nauseum on different topics, like treating a symptom versus treating the root or the cause. In therapy, I think that's often a lot of what it is like they're doing some excavation to get into like what was it that brought this trauma about, not just treating the trauma, but getting to the roots of it, and then learning how to like either change the thing that is maybe still happening or to heal from something that did happen. So it's just like, if any, I don't know. I also have no idea what biblical counseling means.
Well, I think it means going to people with specific religious questions, and that's all over the Bible. I mean, you would go to receive judgments from, Moses and the elders, or in ancient cities, you would go, and if you had a dispute or you had a question, you'd go to elders and they would sort of arbitrate those sorts of things. So a place of wisdom. So
the wisdom
I'm
will send
all
you
for
to a physician.
I'm all for wisdom conversations with
Sure.
I love spiritual direction with people who come from different traditions than mine. Love that. Love.
But then at the same time, we've also talked about how pastors will sometimes go out of their lane and do therapy when they don't know what they're doing. And so wisdom,
totally.
Advice,
well, it's
spiritual direction.
John MacArthur. We did a whole thing on John MacArthur saying PTSD isn't real and blah, blah, blah. But let me just say this. So my experience in therapy is there are presenting issues that I show up with. Anxiety, that was my big one. I started to go to therapy because I was so anxious and I just was looking for relief.
Yeah.
I just am done feeling this way. Help. And then a good therapist will help you. You'll back trail.
Yeah.
From the presenting issue to, maybe the roots of those sorts of things.
Yeah.
And then you get equipped for, okay, so next time that happens, maybe we try this. And that's where their modality comes in. So the guy I'm working with, Will, his modality is called NARM, which is about emotional regulation, which is beautiful. So he's always asking, okay, so what would it look like to stay connected with the person that you're upset with? So let's say you get upset with your spouse or your kids or your friend. What does it look like to stay emotionally connected to them, not overbearing and being too angry, and not withdrawing and punishing, which is usually my move, but staying connected to them and expressing that you just were hurt by what it is that they did or said. I mean, it's like foreign territory to me. So Will, I asked him a direct question about a family relationship I have, and he answered it and then said, well, I feel like I just robbed you of something, which is the process of, because he will say, well, I mean, how do you think you should have responded? And I know sometimes therapists get a bad rap for that, but that's kind of how Jesus did it.
Yeah, inviting you into the process. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. So all that is to say, man, I see good sides all over the place on here. And I do think biblical wisdom matters. I'm not denigrating the fact that in a context where people have demonstrated that they are committed to us and they are for us and they are with us no matter what, there is a legit biblical towards maturity that we are to do. And that some forms of therapy can be helpful towards that. I'm not denying that at all. I am saying, though, per Tim Stafford's last comment, that I think a therapeutic relationship is slightly different than that, because they're not towarding us. We rather, and even when I've been in group therapy, the group actually is the one that towards everybody. It's not the therapist. The therapist is just inviting people into participation and curiosity, and I mean, it's just beautiful. So all that is to say, I think this is really worth sustained conversation, because obviously Tim and I are big beneficiaries of quality therapy. And I've had maybe 4 or 5 different therapists and have explored. I had the first guy I ever went to was very, very direct. I was telling him, and this was good for me. I was telling him all of my symptoms, and it was about anxiety. And I was just like, man, I just don't get why this is happening to me. I don't get it. Why can't I be normal? Blah, blah, blah. And he said, so you're special even in your illness. And that's all he said. meaning, so no one else struggles with this. You're the only one, right? I mean, it was just this, and that was great for me when I first started therapy, like in a narcissistic shell. It was great that he would just sort of have these little punctures. But as I've matured and grown, hopefully a little bit since then, that's not what I need. What I need is somebody to just sit and reflect back like a mirror.
Yeah, and that's an important thing for people who have not been to therapy yet to know, is that it's okay to say, you know what, I'm going to move on to another one. This doesn't feel like a good fit.
Mm-hmm.
And that's totally fine. And a lot of therapeutic offices now will even preface with that, saying it's easy to switch therapists. It's easy to find someone else. And that can be really important. I had one before this one that was not very good. Yeah. And that's okay.
Yep.
Maybe he'll be great for somebody else. He wasn't good for me.
Yeah.
But that second email, I think that's a really profound idea about faith versus queerness, and two different types of people saying that either one of those is a negative, dark place. I think a good therapist would never even venture into that. They might venture into the idea of, do you feel like these are dark aspects, and why? But a good therapist, I don't think, would ever be like, hey, let's
fix that.
Yeah, let's defeat your queerness, or let's defeat your fidelity to Jesus or whatever. Yeah, so it's just like, so I think that's a legit, very legit
that's why I wanted
fear. Yes, but hopefully that's a good therapist wouldn't go there.
Yes, exactly. All right, one question on power. I don't want to throw anyone under the bus.
Uh-oh.
I love that. Any sentence.
I thought you were talking about me.
I'm in. Oh yeah, but Tim Stafford. I don't want to throw anybody under the bus. But in small group on Sunday, our study in parenting heard a story from a well-known evangelical leader about them catching their kids in a lie. They shut the car lights off up the street, snuck around back, etc., to catch them doing something they were forbidden from.
Wait, they went out to catch somebody their kids in a lie?
Their kids in a lie. Yeah, it went out of their way. It didn't sit right with me, the way they spoke of literally praying that God would help them catch their kids doing wrong. Huh. I'm sure that's well-meaning, parenthesis, you can't teach or correct an action if you don't know about it, parenthesis. But it felt like reveling in power over authority as a parent-teenager relationship. How do we exhibit power alongside in dealing with kids? Boom. What a genius question. And Sky raised this too. We didn't get a chance to get to it. But so how about power over with kids? So a couple of thoughts. I mean, I understand that if I have the opportunity to know about what my kids are doing, that could be helpful information. But how I know about it or find out about it cancels out whatever redemptive messaging is going to try to come next. If I believe, and I don't know that this is true, but it's just the way I do it. I don't expect my kids to do wrong. I expect my kids to be great kids. And I'm not surprised when they do great things. I'm surprised when they don't do great things. Now, I'm not talking about performing. I'm talking about moral behavior. Mm-hmm. Like my expectation is, hey, as us, we want to be kind and compassionate people. So I want to catch them doing things right, far more than I want to catch them doing things
Wait, can we
wrong.
take one step back on that too? Because I think this is important.
Yes.
What you just said,
Well, for sure.
The expecting kindness and that kind of stuff. You are very good. You and Jesse have both been very good about talking to your kids about what that means and having a long conversation. So it's not just like, hey, this is who we are. We expect this. And then if they don't do it, you're like, oh. It's more like
you're out.
You're giving them, my initial reaction right off the bat about trying to catch the kids in the bed. It's like having your kids have the moral compass that you want them to do or whatever, to be the type of, it is such a that's a lifelong investment.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like when you're talking, even just with that little simple thing of like, I don't want to catch them in doing this. It's like, but you have also been putting the work into teaching 3 different children with 3 very different personalities and temperaments how to do that. And that's very different than just like expecting something and then reacting when
see.
that doesn't happen.
Thank you. I hope so. I really
think
hope
so.
so. The big goal of our parenting, as we talked about several whatever episodes ago, has been to stay connected to our kids,
Yes.
even in their shame and badness.
Yes.
And allow us so that we can process their real moral behavior together.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like going out of our way to catch them
Yeah.
or hoping to catch them ruins the trust that that whole approach is based on.
That sounds very much like a shame-based culture that many of us grew up in.
Yeah, exactly right. The one non-negotiable for us, well, there were two. One is technology. They did not get technology before they were 16. And the second one, the non-negotiable, is honesty. And if we catch you, catching you isn't the sin. The sin is not telling us before we caught you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So, because our promise is that we'll have a poker face and that we will pick and choose our battles.
Yeah, which is
and
hard.
So we're not going to
fight.
fight.
Very hard parenting posture.
Oh my goodness. Oh, it totally is. Now, power over, I do think, is expressed when they're young. Of course. I mean, yeah. I mean, if when Seth wants to run out in the middle of traffic, I grab that sucker, with everything I've got and pull him back.
Okay,
Or
can we dissect that too then?
Yes.
So is that power over if you're not lording over them or trying to rule, but are in fact using that power to keep them safe? Or, you know what I mean? Is that still power over, even though you are the one exerting and coming in over the top? But you're like, with that example of Seth, like, what would power with be? Go stand in the street with him when cars are coming? Like,
right.
Power over there is to preserve them. It's not to preserve you.
Yeah. And that's the Romans 13 example, that all power over can do is preserve life. It doesn't redeem anything.
Okay.
So yes, I still think it is power over, and Seth experienced it as power over. But in the grand scheme, and in terms of like even disciplining, taking away something or putting them in timeout, like I think there is a gradual like image and identity formation piece that we play to keep them safe. Absolutely. But the goal of keeping them safe is that they grow into free agents and image bearers where all we're doing is power with. Like, I have power over my 19-year-old daughter because we've given her a set amount for college and we control that amount of money. And her choices, she can use that whole amount her first year. She can not use the whole amount and then get some left over. It's just a flat amount that she and Nate both got for their college education. And it's big enough that if they go to a relatively inexpensive school, it will cover it.
Yeah.
It's not big enough that if they decide to go a private education somewhere, that's not going to work. So we wanted to give them some agency. But that literally is the only sort of power over I have in my relationship with my 19-year-old daughter now is, the only consequence there is, well, hey, we're not going to pay for your sorority this year, or we're not going to, you know what I mean? But otherwise, there shouldn't be any other expression of power over left in our relationship. So for me, and we talked about this a lot, love, for it to feel like love and not power, means that the object of our torting has to feel that we're committed to them, committed to be with them, and committed to be for them, regardless of whether or not they behave in the way that we approve of. Then I feel okay torting. And that's what you were bringing up early. This is the covenant God. We've talked about this a bunch on the podcast, but this is one of the most important things I've ever learned about loving people, especially free agents, is that unless they feel like you're with them, for them, and committed to them, they will not receive your torting love as anything other than manipulation or control or power over. If they feel those other three things first, then that love doesn't feel as much power over as it does love. Mm-hmm. And that to me is the big difference. So I can lord over Hannah that we control the purse strings, Or if she knows that we're committed to her, for her, whatever, then we can have those conversations about real consequences, but it doesn't feel like power over. It feels like grieving love or whatever it is. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So my concern about telling a story where I caught my kids, I would much rather, I mean, first of all, how's the kid going to hear that story?
Oh God.
When that story.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like totally against that.
It toward them away from you.
Yeah. Untowarding. But I would also want to the stories I want to tell about my kids are all about the things they do that are great. I would never want to expose the things they did that were wrong. And I don't want them to see me, because they're going to internalize, until they grow up, they internalize my voice as what God's like.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean mine. I don't mean because I'm the man. I just mean like my as
voice.
parent.
Yeah.
As parent. Yeah. In their moral formation, how would they not internalize that God is just like my dad looking for me to screw up and do wrong, and
right.
that's the point. The point is to not do bad things.
Right.
That whole scenario just reinforces, okay, the bad thing was getting caught. Mm-hmm. That was the bad thing.
Yeah.
And I should hide better. And I just think that is the worst approach to parenting. That is so, we talked about it, growing kids God's way-ish and shame-based. Thoughts?
Your kids are going to make terrible decisions. Brace yourself and be willing to walk that with them, I think, is like exactly what you just said. Like it's almost like the symptoms and the causes again, where if you're mm-hmm. just disciplining symptoms over and over again, you're going to lose that connection most likely. And you're never, and nothing's going to change. Like hypothetically, it'll get mm-hmm. worse as they proceed into themselves or into their friends or into whoever they can trust. We've been in a lot of fights with school boards here, and I know it's happening all over the country mm-hmm. with mm-hmm. and some people that listen to this podcast, I know, are going to disagree with this, but like the issues of outing kids who feel gender dysphoria or different things. And often the conversation is about how they don't have, a lot of them are not in safe homes to talk about that stuff. And when you take away a trusted counselor at school and mm-hmm. That safe space, you're making it so they can't be safe. And it's just but that is a reactionary thing, right? Like, I just want to know so that I can deal mm-hmm. with it. And mm-hmm. I just want, it's like, I don't know. We've talked about how your kids are all unique and spirited, and my kids are unique and spirited. So I'm assuming most people's kids are unique and spirited within your own household. Yeah. And if I just react in anger or to mm-hmm. shame my kids, disapproval, they're both going to react so dramatically differently, and neither in a mm-hmm. healthy way. But knowing my kids, having those prolonged conversations with my kids, giving them the tools to understand why I think you should behave this way in this situation.
Totally.
And they'll make mistakes and just be like, okay, where did you turn left here? Where was the left turn? How can we go back and know not to take that turn next time? But I want that trust until the day I die, which means I mm-hmm. have work to do within that. And that work is not just pulling a paddle out and spanking a kid to try to coerce them into not doing mm-hmm. something. Like, again, man.
Yeah. Of the options, stop doing that or hide better. Yeah. I'm going to choose hide better.
Yeah. If I don't understand why I should not be doing it.
Oh, I tell you, my therapist said something that I've known to be true, but until he said it, I didn't know I knew it. And he said the opposite of shame is connection.
Yeah, totally right. And what is more isolating than shame?
So when my kids feel ashamed, that is when we go out to breakfast.
Yeah, that's so good.
And we sit together, and they hate it. They are not fans of knowing the consequence of this is that Dad's going to take me to breakfast, tell me he loves me and is proud of me. And then we're just going to get curious about, okay, so what was that like? And why did you feel like going there? And what's behind that? And blah, 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 blah. That's the thing.
But they may hate that, but they're going to love it later.
Hopefully. And the fruit that it's born isn't their perfect behavior. the fruit that it's borne is as their failures have gotten bigger, I've been able to love them in their shame even more.
Yeah.
So that they trust me with what's real.
Yeah.
Maybe not right away. It may not be, until a couple of days or a week later or a month later or whatever, when they go, okay, so here's where I'm at.
Yeah.
But because that's the whole thing is, I just want to, let's deal with what's real. And the counter to everything we're seeing from this evangelical leader will be like, well, how are you going to know what's real if you don't catch him? And I'm saying there's another way to know what's real. And that's being, and you could say this is naive, but I think the long-term play, because this is how Jesus treats me. The long-term play is that we're playing the long game. And the long game is that you don't hide, that you stay connected even when you screw up.
Period.
And I just think that's the reality of Jesus. That's how he presented the kingdom of God to the sinners, the woman caught in adultery, to the sinful woman notoriously who anoints his feet in the middle of a dinner party. Like there's a reason those people didn't try to justify or defend. It's like when he talks to the Samaritan woman, and the Samaritan woman looks at him and is like, has these theological questions. Jesus goes straight into like, okay, well, go get your husband. And there are reasons why he's doing that we don't have time to get into. But then she goes back to her village and says, this man told me everything about me.
Yeah.
And who armed with the knowledge of knowing everything about me would ever provoke joy?
Right.
In response. I mean, my goodness. So I don't know, man. I just think.
Well, two last little things. There's one is how much of this. Well, I'll ask that one second so you can answer it. One of the things I'm working on in therapy is anxiety. Obviously, I have a lot of anxiety, but some of it is centered around like, as my kids, they're not old enough to drive yet. When they are, I'm not going to function well.
It's awful.
I live in my head, and so
in worst case scenarios.
Yeah, yep. And so like I've only recently been able to go to sleep when Shauna's out of the house. But for a majority of our marriage, if she was out late, I was up and like just anxious, not being able, if she's not responding to text messages or she's later than she said she was going to be, I cannot sleep. So in that way, my anxiety is a lot about control. What can I control? I need to be in control. Only I can prevent X, Y, and Z. And I see that towards how I am approaching parenting. And so I'm working on trying to like, what does it look like for me to let go of control in that way? And it's really, really hard.
It's awful.
And so I live in anxiety around that kind of stuff. The second thing is like, how much of parenting do you think is like log and spec? Not so much in like, oh, I'm making mistakes. Let me fix mine before. Not in that way, but in the way of like, I am human and I do make every single day. I'll take a couple left turns, but that's part of the connection and the conversation with the kids. Is like, even if you don't, even if that's not something you share every time, it's something that it's like you put that on first for yourself, so that you can connect well with them. Yeah, knowing like, hey, I was 17 once. Yeah, I will give you all the details, but but you know what I mean. I do. The reality of what being human looks like in this time period, and again, like I imagine when. So you talked about how your kids have like I don't want to call it a cooling off period, but I can't think of a better term for it. But for like when you do the breakfast thing, sometimes it takes a little bit for them to process it to come back around, and I imagine for Hannah and Nate, that's a different. Like
very much.
Yeah. And so you have to be ready and willing to kind of ride the wave with either of them, how they're going to ride it. And you can't like force the wave to go a certain way. So you have to be patient and willing to like.
That's what I'm learning in therapy.
Totally.
I have to do my work because when they fail, I don't get bummed at their failures. I get bummed at mine.
Yeah.
I should have been more proactive. I should have been all over that. I should have been driving around with the lights off. And right? I mean, that's where I go. I go like, man, I really messed this up.
Yeah.
So my therapist, I mean, this is what our last literally our last session was, and he's like, okay, so what is it about your all powerfulness that when you realize you don't have it with your children causes you to really feel like a failure?
Yeah, great question.
Yes. And that, so back to therapy for a second, because Tim, you brought up something so genius. A good therapist, a biblical therapist, if they're not careful, will exercise power over. They're the ones with the answers and the Bible. You're the one that needs fixed. A really healthy licensed therapist, and they're not all healthy,
right,
will function as power alongside.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what do you want today?
Yeah.
What do you think about this? And they will actually practice the power alongside you in real time with you, instead of the power over here's the diagnosis. And there are times when their expertise needs to shine through, when you're so trapped in something, and it's like, hey, have you thought about this? But they're not lording it over and trying to fix you're there because you know there's something off.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to relate the two conversations back together. I think I think they're in an important way. So with my kids, I don't want to be the judge and jury of their moral behavior. I would rather be alongside them. And yes, there are times to preserve life or to get them out of situations where, man, absolutely we exercise power over. Yep. But
or if they have a demon.
I mean, evidently that's okay. Great callback. All right. One last thing, and then we'll call it an episode. Next week, dude. Next week we are hitting why 7 days in Genesis. What's the significance of 7 days? And how that relates to being human. And it's really great. It's really great. So this young lady wrote us, and you know, one of the most encouraging things we hear from you all is, she said, your ministry has sustained me through many difficult seasons when I feel quite alone in the church world.
Love that.
That is, there are 2 or 3 things we hear that we love. One is, hey, I listen and I often disagree. Love that. And then one is, I don't feel alone. And we really love that. Anyway, I've especially appreciated your last couple of podcast episodes that dealt with power in the church and David Fitch's work on reckoning with power. I have felt this frustration with hierarchy bubbling up over the last few years. I have been hurt by people who've used power over me, and to my shame, I also know well the temptation of using power over myself at times when I've dealt with others. Mm-hmm. This is such a prevalent model of church, to center one's voice and give him all the power and then call for everyone to submit. This is such a baked-in understanding of church structure. I really feel it goes against the way of Jesus, and it needs to change for the health of the body. I also hate it when I see it rise up in myself. Amen. And I love your honesty. Yes, I've used power over in inappropriate ways too. So thank you for putting words to the things I've been sensing and feeling. I'm grateful. I work on staff as an associate pastor. And when I heard last week's podcast, I remembered something I wrote with a co-staff member. She was the children's pastor a few years ago, based on the Matthew 23 passage. So this is what I want to end with. This is their confession that reverses the Matthew 23 woes given to the Pharisees about their hypocrisy. So all of these are the inverse. When Jesus says, woe to you because you're whitewashed tombs, or woe to you because you major on the minors and you miss the big things of the law. So this is our confession, she writes. And I think this is so well freaking said. Based on Matthew 23, first, we do the things we say we will do and put action behind our words, maybe even ahead of them. So that was the big critique, is don't listen to the Pharisees, or listen to what they say, but don't do what they do.
Right.
So she says, we're going to say, we do the things we say we're going to do. Even sometimes we'll do the things before we say them.
So good.
Secondly, we set out to serve, and we do it in a way so as not to be noticed. We seek anonymity. The big second critique was, Pharisees, you do everything for everybody to see. Thirdly,
That
we
one's
choose
so hard for us.
so hard. We choose to be conscientious of why we include our letters of degree or accomplishments or titles. The third thing, before he gets into the woes, is that the Pharisees loved the seats of honor and titles in the marketplaces. So they seek to be sensitive and wise in the use of their credentials. Love that. We love to see others pray before potlucks, dedicate the babies, and baptize the believers. So again, they're centering other people. I mean, I just think this is brilliant. We will let the associate pastor preach at Christmas and Easter, and we might not do the welcome. Again, empowering others at the big services. So Easter and Christmas are kind of like the Super Bowl of, church ministry calendars. So you always put your best, your brightest, and they're saying, no, we will be the kinds of people who choose to put the associate up there, and maybe not even dazzle people by doing announcements. We choose to be equals. No one is on a pedestal. We recognize instead that we are in the company of brothers and sisters. Sisters and brothers. We take responsibility to ensure that our ministry of pastoral care does not turn into emotional entanglement, for only God is Father. Come on! Good night. We reject the lie that we can save anybody, for there is one Savior and Lord, that is Jesus Christ. Come on!
That's big.
We choose to be quiet when the world is loud. We choose to serve others rather than be served. We choose to follow Jesus in the way of love. Man, that's seminary. Let's scrap everything else and let's just do that.
Yeah.
Oh my word. That's incredible. So thought we'd end there.
Yeah.
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
My goodness. Thank you for sending that in.
It's so interesting that would make an interesting seminar. Well, not, it's just what a great interjection into the power over conversation, obviously, just great job. People are going to ask for that. So hopefully they'll be willing to share it, or be willing for us to share it.
She was willing for me to read it, so I can email her and ask if we could share it too.
But what a great, for a pastor, like if all pastors had that hanging in their office, like by the door or something when you walk out, and you're like,
goodness,
hey,
dude,
am I embodying all these things in that way?
Yeah, I might. That's something that could be good for our church too.
Yeah,
like just anyway, because we just spent like a bunch of weeks on the woes.
Well, how often do we talk about, like, what was one of the last ones about, like, being quiet when people are really loud, or
oh yeah,
how often do we have that conversation in the current evangelical climate about those who are the loudest voices in the room? And how do you compete with that? How do you speak speak against it? Blah blah blah, when our job is just to focus on our community and to be quiet and not to try to yell as loud as the loudest voice in the room. It's really hard. You feel like it's the only way to respond. You don't want to feel like that voice is taking all of the air and poisoning people's minds and stuff. But it's like, man, if we all just buckled down and did that, like if this podcast somehow reached a church in every town, which is obviously so far-fetched, but if it did, and then everybody did that in their little communities, like what would happen to the evangelical culture? What would just happen to America?
Yeah.
If it was just, if there were silent servants doing loving, I don't know, such a...
Yeah. That's really, really great. So I appreciate Tim. I think that might be worth typing up.
Yeah.
So I'll ask her permission. Anyway, man, that's really good. And how would you like the idea of a curriculum designed to teach that? I mean, that's 1st and 2nd Corinthians. I mean, that's like Paul's whole mode of ministry is nothing but that.
I know. And remember, I've asked a couple episodes back a while ago about seminary. Like if seminary is giving bad theology or building church structures the way that we have come to learn doesn't work, or is counterintuitive to how people learn and grow in community. But if seminaries are still doing that program, then what? Like, if we're just training up new generations of the same old thing, but if there was something that had curriculum like that taught you to be meek and kind and all that kind of stuff, to act before you speak, and or whatever the first one was, like our actions will go before our words. Speech. Yeah.
Yes.
It's good stuff.
Oh, it is, bro.
Ask her if she wants to start a new seminary, and
we're in. We'll be the first 2 students. Absolutely. Also, speaking of gifts to the world, Tim Stafford has put together a merch store, a Voxology merch store on Etsy, because nothing screams Voxology like Etsy, the website. So 2 middle-aged men on Etsy, nothing to see here, ladies and gentlemen. What do you type in, bro? If they're interested.
It's great question. I'll put it in the show notes, but I think it's just etsy.com / I got in trouble. I've been getting in trouble for saying /.
Oh, it's not a /? What is it?
I don't know.
I thought / and / were legit titles for things.
So did I, but I've been reprimanded a couple times for saying that in the outro, which is pre-recorded, so it's on there every week, just saying it over and over again. I will put it in the show notes. I'm pretty sure it's just Voxology.
Nice. There are some people who have asked, and by some I mean probably 3. And for you 3, if you go on Etsy, and there's a little thing there, and you can buy things with the Voxology logo. And I have to be honest, the hat that Tim designed is his. It's kind of the best piece of work we got right now. But then we got
T-shirts, sweatshirts, mugs, journals. Oh, we got it all, folks. Come on down.
Wow. All right.
Help us build another non-friends. Oh, our mutual friend sent me a thing this morning in the desert that's like has 16 bedrooms and all the stuff that you can rent out. And I was like, oh, there's the non-friends. This would be amazing.
In the desert. Ooh,
yeah, I would change the dynamic a bit, but I think it could be pretty rad.
From Nashville to the desert, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. We already have somebody who emailed us and said, hey, keep me on the list for next year's, which, look at us go.
I hate the heat more than anything. It's so hot right now, but man, there's something about the desert that can unlock some magical things. I really like it.
I'm not surprised people listen to this at double speed. I'm just reflecting on this.
Well, in that case,
all right.
I hate being hot.
All right, friends, on that note, thank you for the great emails and questions. Yeah, you're welcome. See ya.